Velkommen alle sammen. Jeg synes det er en veldig stor ære å få lov å sitte her med Ayad Akhtar, som de fleste av dere skal se stykket til etterpå. Og now I'm starting to talk English.
Yeah, thank you.
It's okay?
It's good.
Yeah. Okay.
I had no idea what you just said.
Yeah.
It sounded great. I mean, Norwegian's a beautiful language, but don't know what it means.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You are an American playwright, novelist, screenwriter, and also actor.
It's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah, and your play Disgraced won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. It was the most produced play in America for the 2015-16 season.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And I feel we are extremely lucky to have you here in Norway. And
I'm very lucky to be here.
And your play is now going to have premiere just after the talk.
Yeah.
I would start off by asking you to bring us back to the idea of Disgraced.
You know, it's a question I get a lot, and it's a hard question to answer in a way, because as an artist, of course, I have ideas and why I think I'm writing something, but I have so many ideas that I don't always write them. And an idea has to take on its own life.
Yeah.
It has to become alive, almost like a person, and then you follow it, or it beckons you, and then you begin to interact with it. I don't know why this idea, amongst all of the other ideas, really came out of me. I mean, it was like a fever in a way, with the very first draft of the play. I mean, of course, the world has changed so much since 9/11, and life for folks who are Muslim, or born Muslim, or whatever iteration of Islam you want to call it, has changed a lot around the world, Western world, but also in the Muslim world since 9/11. So that's something that's been on my mind. But I think that the thing that I probably was most interested in a way that got me going, was how everybody was talking about Islam all the time.
And this was back in
This is 2009 to 2010. And then we did the first production in 2012. So it was around that time. It was not almost 10 years after 9/11.
And just describe the political atmosphere in the US at that time that may have triggered the idea for Disgraced.
From today's perspective, it was a golden age.
Yeah.
Who knew that we could look back 10 years ago and think, wow, America was great.
Yeah.
So, but I think, you know,
things can always get worse.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Enjoy it while it lasts. I think that. Well, I guess what I would say about that is that it was clear to me about 8 or 9 years after 9/11 that my career and my identity were going to be defined by being Muslim in a way that I just was never going to escape.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to escape it. It didn't matter that I did all kinds of other things.
You were just a Muslim.
Well, and even, you know, I don't practice. My dad hates religion. And I mean, it's like, I grew up in an atmosphere that was not particularly Muslim. But the fact of that marker was so decisive socially that I think I started to realize, oh, there's some rich territory here. So then I just began to, as I said, become obsessed with this idea.
Because the search for, you searching for your identity, it's...
But I wasn't searching for my identity. That's what I'm saying.
You felt
perceived as having an identity that I don't have.
Yeah.
But somehow I have to account for that. So I have to make a statement that says, oh, I'm not interested in that identity. But then everyone's like, well, that's really strange. I mean, you have a different identity, don't you? I mean, you have the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then you got to then explain that. And that's fine, but it felt like rich dramatic material. And, you know, in this play, the lead, played by Assad, you know, he's a Muslim, but he doesn't think of himself as a Muslim. So he's a non-Muslim Muslim. But for the audience, he's only a Muslim. And that's the dynamic of the whole play. That's what happens on the stage as well as out in the audience.
Going back to the time, 2011, 2010, and things have gotten worse.
Sure.
What do you think that, how does America look today that it didn't at that time? And why do you think that this piece is still so relevant?
Well, those are two different questions, right? How does America look today versus how did it then? I think we're seeing across the world the rise of a kind of transnational corporate order that is the real political order of our time. And I think you're seeing the people who feel that there is no way to escape from this corporate order. Their governments cannot control the way that money flows around the planet and how that money is determining people's choices. And I think they've lost hope in democracy because democracy is not solving this problem. And so they turn to these people like Trump and others who promise that they're going to solve the problem, but the problem that they propose is not the real problem. The problem is not immigration. Yes, that's a problem, but not in the way that they're talking about it. So that's how America has changed, which is not really relevant to the play except insofar as the deeper subject of the play is how we talk about politics. And what you'll see on stage is a play where people speak from they get forced to speak from their tribal identities, which in 2012, when this play premiered, only happened on stage. It didn't happen out in the world. Now it's happening everywhere. It's happening on the street corner, it's happening in coffee shops, it's happening in churches, it's happening in people's living rooms. So in a way, the play is more relevant because it's speaking about the world that has come into being. But it is also less shocking because people are surrounded by this kind of talk now. People are nasty about each other in ways that you would never have imagined even 6-7 years ago that they would speak in public like that.
And that's why maybe I read in an interview with you, you said, I'm not writing about Muslim identity, I'm writing about modern American identity.
Well, I'm writing about American experience. You know, I just happen to be doing it from my perspective, which is the perspective of a non-Muslim Muslim.
Because you're not a Muslim.
Well, I'm not a Muslim. You know, do I believe that Muhammad received the Word of God and that Word of God is unchanging and that it represents some perfect moment in human history where God spoke to a man? No, I don't believe that. I also don't believe in all of the other stuff either, whether it's Jesus or Moses or any of that stuff. I think they're great stories, and I think they're stories that can inspire the good in us. They also, people tend to want to kill each other because of these stories too, and that's interesting, at least from a dramatic point of view. So I'm not Muslim to Muslims. They wouldn't say I was Muslim. You know, they would say, oh, he's not a Muslim. But of course, to everybody else, I am.
And it must be quite irritating for you to get this question from me, because
it's okay.
I'm also very annoyed when I get this question. And I also think that, you know, religion is, in a universal perspective, it's quite something quite personal. I mean, you don't go around asking, are you Christian? How deep Christian are you? Do you believe in this and that? But I think it has become some sort of human right to ask people with a Muslim identity or background.
What they're asking is, are you an enemy or are you a friend?
Yeah. And then you are identified and you're put in a box. As
friend or enemy.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
And so the piece, Disgraced, are you trying to communicate this type, the aggression that might lay in a Muslim community?
No, I think I'm just trying to tell a really good story.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to tell a really good story about all of this.
Yeah.
But I don't have a point.
So it's not like you have a conclusion.
I have no conclusion, but I hope that you will feel satisfied even if you're upset at the end of the play.
Yeah, because that was the question I had, that as an artist, I mean, I meet different type of people, and some writers, they tell me that, you know, I get this idea, and I jump to a conclusion, and then I write this piece because I'm going to reach that conclusion. But then I have other people that say, well, I just got an idea, and I don't know where it's going to take me. I don't really know what I'm saying, but it's just this huge piece.
Right. Well, I think that it's like a journey. When you're on a journey and you don't really know where you're going, it's more exciting. Then when the journey is over, you can look back and say, well, these are the things that I did, and these are the places that I saw. And so that balance as a writer is important, because when I'm first writing it, it's important that I not know too much. But when I'm done, I have to have some idea of where I've been in order to be able to shape it better for the audience. So there is both predictability and unpredictability built into the process.
And I'm not going to reveal too much of the play, but it's the setting is a dinner.
Yeah, the third scene of the play, the longest scene, is a dinner party.
Why did you choose that setting?
I didn't really choose it, but it sort of happened by itself. And then after I wrote the scene, I realized that there had been a dinner party at my house, which was not too dissimilar from, I mean, there was no violence in my house, but sort of the underlying dynamics were already in place. So, I also, you know, I didn't write a play until much later in my writing career. I wrote a lot of screenplays and novels and stuff, you know, but didn't write a play. I always knew I was going to write a play since I was in my 20s. I knew I would write a play, and I always knew there would be a dinner table in it. Right?
What's so appealing about the dinner table?
I don't know. I would look at that. In my mind, I would see this table, and I thought, oh God, there's going to be a great play, and it's going to happen on this table. And it wasn't until like 12 years later that I wrote. So it's, you know, again, you don't always understand what the inspirations are.
Can we see you in this piece? Or are you just telling a good story?
Sure. No, I mean, I can't tell a good story without revealing aspects of myself or using things from my life. I have to use my life, otherwise it doesn't feel real to me. And if it doesn't feel real to me, it's not going to feel real to an audience.
So how personal is it?
It is very personal, but it's not just a mirror. I mean, I'm in different ways all of those characters. You know, I used to say when I was pre-Sun Yi, before he was married to Sun Yi, I used to say that Woody Allen was one of my favorite artists. And there is a character in this play who's a Jewish-American curator who's got a lot of jokes. Some of them are inspired by Woody Allen. And you know what? That's probably me writing myself into the role of a Jewish-American curator who is trying to be like Woody Allen. So I'm also in that character, even though nobody would necessarily see that. They would think, oh, he must be the other one. But no, I'm everywhere.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's, I should learn that, how to be everywhere.
I think you're doing fine.
Yeah. You said that you knew that this was going to be a play. I mean, you do write books as well, and you just told me, I don't know if I'm revealing too much, but fine. You just told me that actually you're finishing a book now, and you have like your last 10 days of editing it, so you're personally in a quite intense phase yourself. But how did you know that this was going to be, Disgraced was a play, not a book?
You know, I think,
or a novel.
Right, totally. I think that each of the forms, because I also write for the movies, they're all so different. And, you know, the way that I like to think of it, or the way that I tend to think of it, is that when you're writing a novel, you can speak to the reader, and you can describe the interior space of the book. You can whisper into their ear, and you can be rich in your descriptions of what you're saying about what's happening. When you're writing a movie, the big screen and the closeness of the faces and close-up, the audience can feel very close to the story, but they don't get that voice whispering inside them, but there's still an interiority. In the theater, there's no interiority. The audience is there, the actors are there. It's pure exteriority. They are watching. And then if it's good, they throw themselves inside the situation and they start to imagine what they think is happening in there. And each of those stories, each of those modalities is good for different things. And I think that one of the things that the theater is very good for is ideas. Ideas can live in the theater because in a way, the audience has enough distance. They don't have a narrator who's trying to manipulate them by telling them ideas in the story. And film doesn't have enough language in it that's verbal language to carry ideas. But the theater, for some reason, because language lives differently in the present space between the actor and the audience, ideas can live in a different way. And I always knew that this play was going to be, in a way, was going to be about a debate of ideas.
I think you work all the time.
What do you mean?
I mean, you write plays, you write novels, you do theater,
Yeah,
you're an actor.
I have fun.
What is your, how would I put it? I mean, what is your driving force? What drives you?
I had a high school teacher.
What is it that you want?
Yeah. It's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that in public. I had a high school teacher who changed my life. She was a literature teacher. And she made me fall in love with literature because she made me see the way she would talk about it, the way she would make us students think about it, that being immersed in literature was like being absorbed into a higher order of being. That we were thinking higher thoughts and summoning higher parts of ourselves to understand bigger perspectives. And I was 15 when I had her, and she completely made me fall in love with storytelling and literature in a way that I have never fallen out of love with it. It's been the great gift of my life that I've never questioned for a moment what I would do, even though I had so much difficulty. It took me a very long time to even be able to make a solid living doing this. I mean, my parents were like, what is wrong with this kid? He was so smart, and what is happening to him? But I never questioned that because I was so deeply in love with that. I found my calling, I guess. So that's what I want. And I love audiences. I don't know why. I just love the opportunity to become one with the audience.
To interact.
No, to absorb them in an experience. And that we can become absorbed together. That audience and stage can become one. It's a beautiful feeling. I don't know why I love it so much, but I do. So,
beautifully put. One of my favorite...
Which is not, I don't know if that's the experience you're going to have. Okay. That's the goal.
One of my very favorite writers, Arundhati Roy, she once said that fiction is truth.
Right.
It's the only thing that actually makes sense in a way. Do you think that fiction, in understanding extremely difficult political situations in the world today with a lot of polarization, hate toward Muslims, all of this, do you think fiction can play a more vital role in understanding?
It depends on why we're here, right? So I'm going to be honest about this. I don't know that Shakespeare necessarily, I don't know that we know what his views were. We don't know whether he was a secret Catholic or whether he was a committed Protestant. We don't know whether he believed kings had too much power or didn't have enough power. He's a writer. His job wasn't to have an opinion, right? I don't think my job is to have an opinion. We're here and we're living in this complicated world where people fight, where people have points of view, where there is bloodshed. And that is just reality. And inside that, I don't think the artist's job is to say, hey, people, you should be nicer to each other. I think that's the job of our clergy. I think we should go to church and maybe be interested in that. But when it comes to art, I think if art can help us understand more deeply the richness of the human experience and the richness of our own experience, which means contradiction, and to feel that contradiction, it brings us back to ourselves in a way that I think is remarkable. Does that mean that somebody who has a great experience of art is going to stop murdering someone? I don't think so. I don't think that watching Othello makes anybody realize, oh, that's really not a good idea. I shouldn't kill somebody. If you think you shouldn't kill somebody, you probably are going to think the same thing after Othello that you thought before Othello.
Yeah.
It's an unusual perspective about art, but I don't think that artists are advertisers. I don't think they're about advocating for points of view. I don't think they're about morality. I think stories are about energy, not ethics. I think they demand...
Is it also a helping factor in a kind of understanding our time? I mean, we live in a time where you have so many different platforms, all type of social media arenas that can actually be a tool in making people interact more with each other, understanding each other. But what we see is quite the opposite, that people are extremely lonely and differences are growing, polarization is growing. And my question is, can art or fiction play a more important role in this? In kind of doing something with these gaps?
Yeah, I understand. I think that we're living in an era where people have confused information for knowledge. And so that means that the transition from knowledge to wisdom is very difficult to get to, because you can't get from information to wisdom. You can get from knowledge to wisdom, but you can't get from information to wisdom. And if people think information is knowledge, then they're fundamentally misapprehending something about reality.
Interesting.
Right? So in that landscape, I don't really understand your question. I don't mean it as an insult. I just mean it's not a question that is actually related to what's happening right now. Because in a way, another way of putting what I would say is that the Eskimo Inuit culture has a wonderful saying that Barry Lopez, a great American writer, often quotes. He says that storyteller is the one who creates the atmosphere for wisdom to appear. Right? So if you have a culture that's obsessed with information, doesn't understand what knowledge is anymore, what relevance is the atmosphere that creates the possibility for wisdom? And that's a tricky place for an artist to be today, and which is why I don't feel telling the audience what to think helps. If I can absorb them into an experience and they can become absorbed into their own contemplative, emotional experiences and processes, that's enough. And if they come to the conclusion after that thinking, you know what? I'm Norwegian, and excuse me, fuck it, Norway matters, and I'm sick and tired of these fucking foreigners. We've got to try to preserve something that is ours. And that play, you know what, that only made me feel that more. Then that's what it is. It's not my job to tell that person they're wrong. They're going to have to live with the consequences of that choice.
Yeah.
And now as we have, in the next 20 years, there's going to be 1 billion people moving across the planet because of water. So what happened in Syria was a trial run, and it was kindergarten compared to what's going to come. And it is going to obliterate the nation state. It is going to obliterate the nation state. So what's ahead? I don't know. And I don't think it's my place to say, well, this is the attitude you people should have about what's coming. You have to figure it out.
Yeah, good answer. Before you came to Norway, you told me you have been to Norway before as well, but for someone from America or the US, you have some sort of pictures of how Norway is, how Oslo is, and it seems like very peaceful.
Fish, oil.
Nice. But you told me you're just working 12 hours every day you're here, but there is something outside the window, and you have a picture of it. Yeah. But then, a few weeks back, there was an attack in a mosque. A 21-year-old Norwegian right-wing came into the mosque with a gun and tried to shoot Muslims. It was shocking for us,
Sure.
for the whole of Norway.
Yeah.
And then,
Though you'd had that extraordinary and that horrifying attack with the Breivik thing, I mean, that was, I mean, to me, that was a game changer, just to imagine that something like that was possible. So you'd already had that experience in a way, but yeah.
so what is your picture of Norway?
Oh. Well, my picture of Norway is, I mean, I've been a big student of Ibsen most of my life. So I have some vision, literary vision of Norway. Our neighbors across the street in Milwaukee were from Norway. They used to have a Norwegian flag, and they kept everything very clean around their yard, much more so than everybody else on the block. You know, I was here 5 years ago. It felt like a place where people are happy and sad, and you can't tell the difference. And it was both shocking and not shocking that there was that kind of violence perpetrated toward outsiders. You know, one has the idea, at least in the United States, that the Scandinavian countries are peaceful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you have these eruptions of violence that happen sometimes, and you've had a bit of it in Sweden too. And,
yeah.
and you just sort of think, okay, there's some tensions, that the homogeneity, that the stability of the society is predicated on a certain kind of sameness.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's what it is, right? And then the disruption of that sameness is a particularly shocking experience for that group of people. And then there are these eruptions. So that was my thought. I didn't think Norwegians were worse than anybody else. Maybe a little bit better in some ways. Who knows?
Not so expressive, as you put it.
And yet, those still waters run deep, as you see in Ibsen. You know, those plays are so deep. I think he's the greatest dramatist in Shakespeare. You know, so I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. Yeah, but thank you.
The time is running. I'm seeing that our time is kind of finished, but I just wanted to ask you one last question. When you see your play here, how does it make you feel? Like, you know, you had this idea back in so many years back.
I know.
And suddenly you're here, and your piece is put up here. How is it to see it?
I've struggled a lot as a writer in my life, and some of the things that have happened to me in the past 6, 7 years, 8 years, feel like miracles. And it really makes you understand how wonderful life can be. That you can sit in a room. I had no agent. I wrote this play. I didn't think anybody would care. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I was so free about it. And all of a sudden, it's being done everywhere in the world, and suddenly I'm in Norway at Ibsen's theater, and I'm going to see a premiere of Disgraced. Is that my life? I can't believe that.
Ayad Akhtar, it was really nice to speak to you.
Thank you. Thank you.